You think of an object, and it's just a thing, right? A passive artifact sitting in a museum. But what if I told you that some objects aren't just collecting dust? What if they're actually active players in history? Objects that have shaped how we see the past, and even how we see ourselves today.
Okay, so let's take a look at a really good example of this. This is the San Crist de Lepant, or the Holy Christ of Lepanto. It's housed in the Barcelona Cathedral. And right away, the first thing you notice is, well, it's strange, isn't it? It's all bent and curved in this way that feels kind of unnatural. It just has this incredibly powerful, almost mysterious vibe to it.
And that bizarre shape? Well, that's where the legend begins. This story, and you can see just how powerful it still is from this quote by a modern visitor, is that this very crucifix was on the main flagship at the famous Battle of Lepanto way back in 1571. And get this, it supposedly dodged a cannonball, just bent right out of the way, a miracle, they say, that helped secure a Christian victory. And that story gives this object an emotional punch that you can still feel today.
So that brings up a really big question, doesn't it? How does a simple figure carved out of wood become that powerful? We need to peel back the layers of the legend and get to the real story here, because the journey of this one crucifix, man, it tells us so much about how history itself is actually built. All right, so to really get the object, we've got to start with the man and the moment at the heart of the whole myth, a guy named Don John of Austria, and the battle that made him a legend. I mean, this guy's rise was just meteoric. He was born the illegitimate son of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, so he starts from the shadows. But then, his half-brother, King Philip II of Spain, publicly acknowledges him. He immediately proves he's a brilliant military commander. And by 1571, he's only 24 years old, and they put him in charge of the entire fleet of the Holy League. We're talking a huge coalition of Catholic powers. And that massive fleet? It was brought together for one reason and one reason only, to take on the might of the Ottoman Empire's navy. The two sides, these two colossal forces, clashed in the Gulf of Patras, right off the coast of Greece. The result was one of the biggest, most decisive naval battles in all of history, the Battle of Lepanto. And the battle itself was just brutal. The scale is hard to even imagine. Now, the Holy League did win, but the price was staggering. We're talking over 13,000 casualties. That's killed and wounded just on the Christian side alone. This was a victory, for sure, but it was absolutely soaked in blood. But you see, a battle is never just about the fighting. It's about the story that gets told after the fighting stops. And with Lepanto, that story, that narrative, was shaped immediately and very, very deliberately. Take a look at this. This was the official banner of the Holy League, flown on Don John's flagship. And what's right there at the top, front and center, the crucifix. So from the very beginning, we're talking before a single cannon was even fired, the crucifix was set up as the central unifying symbol of this whole campaign. This wasn't just being sold as a political conflict. No, this was being framed as a holy war. And the second the news of the victory hit land, the propaganda machine just kicked into high gear. You had these handwritten newsletters, which were basically the 16th century internet, flying all over Europe. And they weren't talking about strategy, they were calling it a miracle from God. In Barcelona, the city council immediately called for religious processions. Preachers got up and called Don John a new David taking down Goliath. And then poems and artwork sealed the deal, cementing this idea of a divine Christian victory in everyone's mind. There's actually a name for this whole approach: crusade humanism. It's this really potent blend of political and religious language that turns a regular conflict into a sacred mission. It painted guys like King Philip II and Don John not as mere generals or kings, but as divinely chosen defenders of the entire faith. Okay, so you've got this incredibly powerful holy war narrative locked in. Now let's get back to our specific crucifix in Barcelona and see how it became the physical symbol of that whole story, and how, in the process, it started making a whole new history all on its own. You can kind of break down the life of this symbol into three big stages. First, back in the 16th century, the legend is born, the story linking it directly to Don John and that miracle at Lepanto. Then, for the next couple hundred years, its worship becomes formalized, with an actual religious group created to look after it. And then, in the 20th century, its meaning gets completely hijacked for a totally new and deeply political crusade. And the change is just, wow, it's so striking. On the left here, you see a sketch from the 18th century. It's a religious group. They're worshiping the crucifix. But on the right,
That's a photo from 1939. It is the exact same object, but now it's the centerpiece of a fascist military parade. The object didn't change, but what it meant, that was completely reinvented.
And this is the moment it was taken. After winning the brutal Spanish Civil War, General Francisco Franco used this crucifix as a powerful backdrop for a speech. And he wasn't shy about it. He straight up framed his fight against Republicans and communists as a modern Lepanto, a brand new crusade to save not just Spain, but all of Christian civilization from its enemies.
Yeah, there was nothing subtle about this. Franco's top advisor, a guy named Luis Carrera Blanco, he spelled it out loud and clear. He said the fight in the 20th century was the exact same as the one in 1571, a struggle between militant Catholicism and the enemies of faith. They were literally using a centuries-old battle to justify their modern political ideology.
And they even gave this ideology a catchy name, the Spirit of Lepanto. It was this powerful propaganda tool that basically said Spain was in a never-ending crusade. Sure, the enemy was different now. It wasn't the Ottoman Empire, it was communism. But the mission? That was presented as timeless, defending Christian civilization. And our crucifix, it became the ultimate symbol of that idea.
So after all that, what does this object's wild, centuries-long journey really tell us? Well, it reveals something absolutely fundamental about what history even is. And here's the key takeaway. History is not just a list of things that happened. It's not just a collection of facts. It's an active process of storytelling. The stories we choose to tell, the heroes we put on a pedestal, the symbols we worship, all of that is shaped by what we need and what we believe right here in the present.
And this crucifix is the perfect example. The legend? That's a simple, miraculous story. You've got your good guys and your bad guys, clear as day. But the history, that shows us something much more complicated. It's a powerful political symbol, used over and over again to take messy, complex events and boil them down into simple terms. First, it's a holy war. Then, centuries later, it's a fascist crusade.
Which leaves us with one last kind of challenging thought. The crucifix of Lepanto wasn't made to be a fascist symbol. Of course not. But it became one. So it really makes you wonder, right? What objects from our own time, just ordinary things we see every day, what will people, centuries from now, pick up and use to tell the story of us?